Good evening, Sarah. Happy Friday. I can't believe we're finally here.
Yes, been looking forward to it. It's been a long week, so excited to talk to you.
Yes, I'm so excited. And, even before we get into that, Fridays are just, I think, a special time. Like, we got to recognize that we were at like the start of the weekend. For me, I've been in this grad school season, like, is my most recent season, right? So for me, the most exciting thing on a Saturday was like a really good frozen pizza, right? I'd come home, do some
Nice.
frozen pizza. Do you have any Friday things that you look forward to or little points in your week that make you super excited or help you keep going?
I would say like at the height of the summer, it was definitely like a glass of wine. Or I lately have just been into shows, just to unwind. So on Netflix or Hulu or HBO Max, I just kind of go through the usual loop of trying to find something to settle me
Yes.
into the evening. Yeah.
There's nothing more satisfying than like knowing what you're going to turn on at the end of your day, right? Like the ambiguous, I don't know what to watch is so painful
Right.
that we need to avoid it. So is there a good show lately that you would suggest for me?
So I don't know if you saw season one of Industry. It's follows like the life of iBankers in London and it's on HBO Max. And they dropped season two. So I've been starting those episodes and it's really quite good.
I don't know how I missed season one, but this sounds so interesting. Is it like a Wolf of Wall Street vibe?
I would say it's like a mix of that, but also Succession. If you watch that, it's a little dark. It takes it, I would say season one takes a little bit to get into. It runs a little slow, but season two is like, okay, they've added a few people to the cast and
Oh
I
my
won't
God, I
ruin it for you. We
love,
can talk about it once you
yes.
get to it, but yeah.
I will keep you posted because I love, London as a setting and then like that whole like business kind of like costume almost, I'm gonna say. I just think is so
Right.
entertaining. So I'm really excited. Industry. All right, I'm adding it to the
Mhm.
queue. Thank you. So now we've, babbled on a bit, had some fun, and I don't want to make people wait any longer to know who this is in front of them, this lovely person. So this is Sarah Sukumaran, founder of Lilith New York City. And I can't wait to unpack a little bit more about what that means today and how you got to this really special place of creating this just like sneaker empire to be or is or all the things. So thank you so much for being here and being willing to share your story today.
Of course. No, thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yay. So I would love to start at the beginning, even before our shared roots at Malloy, to just like where you grew up, what that was like, and when kind of like the sneaker culture and creative culture start to be part of your story.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in Queens, New York. I was born and raised in Elmhurst. And really, I would say grew up in the 80s and 90s, following sports like NBA. And that's really, I think, how I kind of fell into sneakers, on the playground, the handball courts, sneakers were part of our culture before the word sneaker culture really existed. And interestingly, it obviously really kind of manifested on the basketball courts, watching guys play. And that's really how I fell into my love of sneakers. And it's which I always say like Queens culture is sneaker culture. And this was a time when I would say people followed NBA players versus franchises. Like you can be a Penny Hardaway fan, you can be a Scottie Pippen fan, but you didn't necessarily have to support the teams. Like I know I don't think I really supported the Knicks back then, but I was really obsessed with like the silhouettes that those players would wear. And so I think that was really kind of rooted in a lot of people who grew up in the 90s and their love of sneakers as well. So I would say that was kind of where, I grew up in Elmhurst. That's kind of where I fell in love with sneakers. And I would say stayed in Elmhurst much of my life, actually. We moved around to a couple of different apartments, but primarily stayed in the area. I live in kind of like Jackson Heights, East Elmhurst now, which is a little different. But yeah, born and raised in Queens.
Oh, that's so cool. And I love how you're describing or starting to describe like following the players versus like the corporation. I think that so becomes part of, your story as we get to know as we got to know each other the other day, you were explaining about just the maybe the lack of personality or like thoughtfulness that you get at this like macro level of a thing versus these intimate experiences of people interacting with sneakers. And it sounds like even in that world of professional sport, right? There's these intimate moments of individual players interacting with sneakers that you get to appreciate as a fan. So I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and we still see that today, right? I don't think it kind of stayed in the 90s. It's still in 2022, we still feel, when there's a sneaker drop around a Kobe Bryant shoe, the fans go crazy. They definitely want to collect it as part of that hype culture and that, sneaker collector mentality. So we definitely see it transcend time, 100%. So
Yes.
definitely a form of intimacy there.
So cool. And you mentioned also, this like love of sneakers before there was a sneaker culture. Like I'm not so hip on the history of, the emergence of this sneaker culture. Like were people always late waiting on lines on random days to get cool shoes, or, was there a shift that happened? Was it a point in time? Was it gradual? Like what happened? What is
Yeah,
it?
I think there was definitely a point in time where people were, and I wasn't really so rooted in that culture, I would say. I would typically still shop at the Foot Locker and Foot Action or the local spots by me. And for at least the models or styles that I was getting didn't require me to stand on a line, right? You can easily go in the store and try on your size and walk out of the store with a pair. But then you had kind of like in the 2000s where people were really waiting online, limited release, a collaboration with a designer or someone in the streetwear community, where you had, fights would break out while you were waiting online. So it was very intense, and I feel like it's kind of gone away, like with e-commerce, right? Like those experiences have shifted as we gone digital. And it's less about brick and mortar, but there's definitely a nostalgia for that culture and where the roots were, and standing in line early morning with someone, and that's how you meet some of your sneaker culture friends, right? Like people who vibe with you, and so I definitely think that it's evolved, but you kind of get a sense of that online, like from a digital perspective these days.
Yeah, I am really interested in that community aspect of it. I think that's just a sweet way that you describe, like you make your friends, right? Because you are sharing this passion together, doing this crazy thing of waiting in the line. And so
Right.
it makes more sense to me now, even just to kind of put that front and center of how this became a culture and a phenomenon and like a whole thing. But I want to come back to, you mentioned, you were playing on the courts in Elmhurst, right? Or you were watching these people,
Right.
and you're showing up in your own skin, right? In your own gender, in your own like born, assumptions of how you need to be. Like, what is that like for you as a kid in Queens? Just to show up with these, where like maybe everything we're seeing is grown men in professional sports wearing sneakers. Like,
Right.
there.
Yeah, I think for me, it was, most of my friends were guy friends. And so they were the ones who would play basketball after school. And so I went to Catholic school much of my life. And so we were typically in uniform, and we had our regulation kind of like loafer type style shoes, and everyone would kind of switch it up after school, right? Or at gym class. And those were the moments where you can kind of like break out your fresh kicks and kind of show off. And I would find that like the guys would always have, the high heat sneakers, right? They had like the foam posits, the up tempos, the stuff that the basketball players were wearing is what their parents got them. And I would say that, it was more popular around the boys versus the girls, even though the girls played basketball, right? There was a girls basketball team, but the boys were definitely more sneaker obsessed and would talk about it and have the catalogs on hand and make sure that they had the latest drop of a sneaker. And I kind of fell in love with it, even though my parents couldn't afford, like the really expensive sneakers. I still wore like the Air Max Plus. Like that was my favorite silhouette, Air Max 95. I did love the up tempos, but I really had no business wearing basketball shoes, right? Because I didn't play, I wasn't athletic.
Mm.
But I think, I always say like the industry as a whole, the footwear industry really was rooted in male sport and male celebrities, male storytelling. And I think as a kid, as a girl growing up and witnessing that, I also evolved my style. Like it became more tomboy because I felt like I had to fit in, like to be one of the guys, I had to dress like them and kind of dress down my appearance and femininity in a bit. And I don't think over the decades, it's really evolved past that. I think it's, now we see a little bit of change, but the storytelling really hasn't evolved, which I think was interesting. And I think even my sense of style was a function of what was being communicated to me from these larger brands. And I think a lot of women have that experience as well when it comes to their relationship with footwear and streetwear.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. And something that maybe we take for granted in our day to day, right? Like it can feel so I don't know, maybe for me at least, like rebellious to like throw on the cool shoes and like the comfortable sweatshirt and everything. But at the same time, it's like, oh, actually, it's like I was totally conditioned by the advertising to do exactly this. Like
Right.
this is what the path I was led to, even though maybe I didn't even realize it. And I'm curious too, you spoke about, like just coming to this love for this sneaker culture. And I don't know if it's something that can be articulated, but I'm curious to if it is something that can be articulated for you. Like, what about that culture made you fall in love with it? What about sneakers? What made it like, this is my jam?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I ever felt like part of a culture, because I honestly think that that's a word that we use today to describe something that manifested over time. But for me, when I my love of sneakers was simply, I think I'm an introvert all my life. And I think sneakers was one way to showcase like my personality. Like I would say outerwear, like my winter coats and my sneakers are like the two things where I love for them to be flashy. I love for them to like do my storytelling for me in a way, because I am typically quiet and I just love beautiful colors and prints. And I think it comes through that way through my footwear and through outerwear. So that's kind of just how I express myself, I think. And that was through footwear, just being someone who was naturally just more introverted.
Yeah, I mean, that's so cool. And it really resonates with, I think, just like being a New Yorker. I don't know, it feels very New York to have like a coat and a shoes that just
Right.
speak your vibe on your commute, like headphones in, not talking, and you know me already,
Exactly.
right?
Because I typically like my uniform is typically, I've worked in startups my whole life. So I'm always in jeans. It's super comfortable, right? It's really dressed down. It's a t-shirt, plain t-shirt and jeans. And then obviously like my coat and sneakers are like the two things that I personally pay attention to. And then I have like a backpack. Like it's pretty simple. It's very startup uniform, I guess. But yeah, I would say it is quite New Yorker.
Yes, I'm here for it, especially having just recently returned. I am really appreciating all of our special New Yorker isms. So your life starts in Elmhurst. You go to these Catholic schools growing up. What is the next step for you? You go to college, right? How do you decide where that is, or what do you do there?
So I kind of had I guess, going back to high school, Malloy, where we went, I actually was super interested in the sciences. Like I really thought I was going to go down this route of medicine, or at least like biosciences. Like I was really interested in like genetics and genome. And I think it was like junior or senior year where I made this like split game time decision to actually focus on a business degree. So I kind of like went from pre-med to like business. I was like, I wanted something so broad where I can apply whatever I learn in different industries and different verticals that wasn't going to silo me into just medicine. Like I was becoming very apprehensive of just becoming like a doctor or a PhD student. So yeah, I started applying to business focused schools. And so I ended up at Babson, which is like a 4-year business program. I say that because it's quite different from most undergrad programs where you declare your major junior year. Anyone going to Babson is studying business. That's what you're graduating with. And it's kind of like the curriculum is over a 4-year program.
Wow.
So it was like hardcore on the business side of things. And so that school is located in Wellesley, Massachusetts, the same town as Wellesley College. So yeah, that was like post Catholic school for 13 years. I jumped over to Babson. And also probably like the first time I left New York at that point, and spent 4 years in that city.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, what was that like as a New Yorker going to Wellesley, Massachusetts? Do you feel like it made you come more into, who you were in New York, or did it change at all who you were? I'm so curious.
No, I held on to the New Yorker. I took the I don't know if you remember Fung Wah bus, but it's, the cheap $5 bus that you can take from, like Penn Station all the way to South Station in Boston. I was back home every weekend. Like I did not like at least my first 2 years, I found it hard to find my footing. Just, I think I came from low income background where a lot of the students I went to college with were so wealthy. Like that's when I realized what wealth disparity was. When I went to college, like it was so apparent. I feel like in Queens, everyone's low income. So like anyone we went to school with, no, it wasn't a thing, right? Like it was like, okay, we're all poor, or we all, our parents don't make a lot of money. We're children of immigrants. That was the norm. But when you go to a school like Babson or college, like I didn't even know like there's like kids of billionaires, like who I share a class with. Like that, like to me, like it's, I was worried about overdraft fees, right? Like 4 years of college, and worried about like not having enough money to pay bills, with these kids are like getting bottle service at the clubs in Boston. And it's like, to me, that was like the first time I experienced that, like leaving Queens, New York, like to experience that wealth disparity gap. And it was like very clear and in your face. So yeah, if anything, I kind of became like even more like hardened in New York.
Oh my gosh. I get it
Yeah.
though. I mean, I totally I can understand where you're coming from. And I think that those are such informative experiences to get thrown into this different kind of melting pot of people
Right.
that is coming from a very different walk of life.
100%, yeah.
But it sounds like your story doesn't stop there of like being a different kind of point of view in a room, right? Like you continue down this path of being the divergent voice or the different face. Like tell me how that continues to be part of your trajectory.
Yeah, because I would say high school, I don't know if we touched on this, but it was an all boys high school. So I was like the first co-ed class
Yeah.
of men. And then you go to Babson, which is also predominantly men, I would say. For the most part, it's not, the ratio isn't that terrible, but it's 60-40 split, I would say at the time. And then I, you know, got a business degree, but I actually ended up in the world of startups and tech. I became super technical on a lot of the jobs that I had taken on early on. And I realized like that was actually something I was really good at. Like I probably in hindsight should have like majored in computer science, and became like a back-end engineer, but a lot of that skill I learned on the job through these technical roles. It was just something it just came so naturally. And I learned, I'm someone who asks a lot of questions, and developers and engineers were so kind to actually like take me under their wing and answer and take the time to answer all my questions. And that's kind of where I really developed a technical skill set on the job, and spent most of my career, in product management, which means like building software essentially, building and designing software. Specifically, my background was SaaS enterprise analytics. So software as a service, e-commerce analytics, for example. So that's kind of where my background is.
Oh my gosh. I feel like that is such a unique, again, like point of view to have. We're all using these e-commerce platforms more and more, especially post 2020, but are taking for granted maybe how we show up there, how they cater to us, like what data they're collecting. And here you
Right.
are, like front row seat with these people who are willing to share with you also like their insights into it and how it works. And I loved hearing the other day about kind of your takeaways from that experience and the gaps that you were able to identify because of it. Like I would love to go there if you would.
Yeah. So I would say that's actually, so I am the founder of a footwear company, but I don't actually have footwear development experience. I think by way of my background in tech and analytics, end up at Nike. So Nike reaches out to me. I had, through my career, we were acquired from a larger German tech company. And, Nike at the time had announced what's called like a consumer direct offense, right? So the footwear industry historically has been in the wholesale business. They typically will sell their footwear to a middleman, like a Foot Locker, Foot Action. And, those are the people who really know their consumers, right? Because you're walking into those brick and mortar stores and purchasing your shoe. So they'll know the style, they know your personality, they know kind of like psychographics, all of that data. And a few years ago, the industry as a whole decided to shift away from wholesale and focus on direct to consumer. And with that, internally came a lot of decisions around like, we need to build our tech stack. We need to build our data capabilities, because we need to understand our consumer firsthand. We can no longer rely on a middleman or third party to provide us that data. And so they had made an acquisition of a predictive analytics company, and I joined post-acquisition as director of product. And the product essentially predicts future cash flow for the company based on, historical data set and all of these other factors. And so to me, at this point in time, that was 2018, a few years just prior, I was just frustrated as a consumer. Like I'm still a sneakerhead at that point, still shopping as a woman consumer on these websites, and still finding it incredibly hard to shop styles, getting my size. I wear a woman's 7, which when you convert it to men's is a men's 5. And a lot of sneakers do not drop that small. They typically drop in a men's 7, which is a woman's 9. And so I was struggling just as a consumer. And at this point, this was like 2015, so many women were becoming more and more vocal about the big brands overlooking them as consumers and not really providing silhouettes that they want, colorways, a full size run, because typically women were shopping in either men's or in children's. They would have to convert their sizing. And so this was just me being interested in sneakers, being a sneakerhead, collecting and just buying and wanting to wear cool kicks. was just frustrated. And then fast forward, Nike reaches out to me for this data role. And I was like, okay, this is dope because I've obviously have an interest in the space and, I have a love of data. So this is a dope job to take. But I think what was so frustrating was just as an industry, we knew that women were outspending men in sneaker sales, right? We see that time and time again, year over year, but women were still being frustrated. They were still being very vocal about the gap in the market. And that to me, I think was like the impetus for me to like leave a big company and to actually do and to create my own brand. Because I toyed with a few ideas and iterations of what this brand could be. And at first I was like, okay, it can just be like a shop where we aggregate different brands, right? We have Nike product, we have Adidas, we have Reebok, and we just carry a range of women's product and just make it easy for women to buy, right? Because I felt curation and discovery was also broken from an e-commerce perspective. But I think looking back at how brands sell to us and storytelling, it was still so rooted in male sport, even in like 2020. And that to me was so frustrating. It was like, I still don't see a lot of brown and black faces in campaign ads, right? Or just like more nuanced storytelling about women's issues, women wellness issues, right? Like even brands today are so hesitant to talk about Roe versus Wade. And I felt like there was such a gap in the market and opportunity for us to actually address that as a brand. And so that's why I was like, it's not just creating an aggregate site, it's actually building a brand from the ground up. And that's kind of how Lilith was born.
Ah, what a beautiful origin story. And we're gonna, dive even more into that. But I want to call out, you mentioned, women starting to kind of raise their voice in however way they could, right? To be like, my size literally doesn't exist, or like this doesn't fit my foot, this is not the right shape, this is not the right color, like etc. Where were you seeing these voices? Like, were people taking to certain platforms? Were they writing letters to Nike? Like, what was happening literally?
So I personally was seeing it a lot through, like, this was a big time where blogs were around, like streetwear blogs, and a lot of women run blogs where they would like, take photos of their kicks. And that was my early days. Like when I first created the Lilith Instagram account, I was taking pictures of the Nikes I wore or the New Balances that I wore. So I would see a lot of it on Instagram because Instagram was still in its early days at that point. And then just blog content, and just talking to women sneakerheads, right? Like knowing other fellow women were also struggling. So I would say those were probably the three outlets that I saw that women were being incredibly vocal. And even once I got to the big company, even in like women employees would still be upset, like when we go shopping and we don't have it in our size, right? So it's not just an external thing, it's everyone is experiencing that gap.
Yeah. And so you had that idea like a few years earlier, right? Like you were taking the pictures of your shoes, you'd bought the website title like Lilith. At Nike, then how do you decide that you're like, okay, I need to break away and do this myself versus I want to fight internally, battle after battle to make a new Nike shoe, right? What was that decision-making process like for you?
So I was in a data role and I rolled into membership. So I would say like the first year, I was heads down on the job. Like I was just like, I love what I do. Like I would love working on the tech side of things. And so I was heads down, just executing with my team on the stuff I was hired to do, right? Like it wasn't so much trying to push my ideas through, but like through the data, we could do that a little bit. Like when we were working with marketing teams, I can create a cohort of, pull a cohort of data where I say, hey, these women are in New York and they're high LTV, high, lifetime value customers. Let's do something for them. Let's do something special. Or here's a cohort of women who are actually really not performing so well. Like, why is that? Can we figure it out? Can we help hold their hand through this like customer journey on the website or something?
Wow.
And so those were the moments where I would say like, hey, like there's so much more we can do. But I think it's also like, these big brands are new to data. They, working with data is something that's very much a new concept that's nascent for them. They don't have the technology. Maybe they don't have the talent internally to interpret the data and execute. Because when you're in the wholesale business, you've never had to do this before. So I think it's like a bit of just like an on-ramp for them. And then for me, I think I just was like, this is just a low-hanging fruit opportunity. I just saw this as like an obvious opportunity. I'm like, how dope would it be to like just create a brand new brand from the ground up? So I then started thinking like, I only lasted, I think I stayed less than 2 years, but I started figuring out like, what does it take to even start a company, like financial wise, like how much savings do I have? Because I was going to bootstrap it. on my own without taking any external financing. What does it take? What do I need to do? What do I like? So I started just assessing like, you know, what are the realistic steps I need to take to execute this vision? Because I think for 5 years at that point, I had the first idea in 2015, didn't do anything, but had this like feeling of regret, like you could be the person who changes this issue, right? But for 5 years, I'd read the articles and just like move on with my day. Like the company was in the middle of an acquisition and just didn't have the bandwidth. So you have that sense of regret for 5 years. And I said, like, you know what? Just try it. If it fails, it fails. Fine. But like, you won't ever wake up with that feeling of like, what if? And if it succeeds, amazing. But I knew that like I had to do this in my lifetime. Like at this point, why, you know, nothing was tying me down.
Yeah.
So it just felt like the opportune moment.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember actually in high school, there was this quote I found that has always stuck with me. And it's like, you can choose to look the other way, but you can never again say you don't know. Right. And so it seems like you had this aha of like, there's this obvious opportunity, but no one else is seeing it.
Right.
And you decided, okay, I'm going to see it and I'm going to like lean into it and do the whole thing, even though my background's not in shoe design. Right.
Yeah.
That's so brave and so just like exciting. I can't imagine the energy that would have been building up to be taking those first steps.
It was scary. It was very scary.
Very scary. So
Yeah.
walk us through now then like the specifics. So you get to this stage of like, okay, I am gonna build Lilith from the ground up, bootstrap it. You started assembling a team, right? Or just like, or like not a team, but like mentors in different areas or like design people and other people. Like what was that like?
Yeah, because I think the first thing you do is like you assess like what is not your skill set, right? And for me, I would say marketing has never been my skill set. Like I've very much been technical, good at numbers. Again, don't also have a design background, right? So that's a different discipline altogether in terms of footwear. So I knew that there were two things I had to hire for, and that was one, footwear development, and two, branding. And so after I quit, so I quit right around the corner from the pandemic, didn't know there was a pandemic kicking off March 2020. And it was a good time to build because obviously we were all home. None of us knew what was happening.
Right.
But time was kind of on my side in that sense, right? So perfect time to build and perfect time to hire because I would say a lot of people were actually like losing projects. So it was just great to be able to just like say, hey, like I have this budget. I need to create some new footwear designs and I also need to create branding. And so I had, that was my primary focus in 2020 was just to develop like, what is this brand ethos? How is it going to show up in the world? What is it that I want to communicate to the footwear industry and to women consumers? And then on the footwear side, just working through the silhouette. So yeah, I would say like that, those were like kind of my immediate steps. As soon as I quit, I incorporated the business like from as an entity standpoint. And then I quickly made the hires that I knew that I needed to, because I have a skill gap, right? Like I don't do footwear design. I don't have a marketing background. So those were the things that I needed to kind of fill in before I can kind of go ahead with the company.
Yeah, I think that's so wise to start with like, what is missing to make this a 1000% like team or,
Right.
Effort. And at the same time, I know that like this is something that you're so passionate about, right? And you've seen so many sneakers. And so you must have maybe brought some vision to the table too, right? Like what did it look like for you to collaborate with these experts in these other lanes that were, essential to what you were doing? Were you coming with, it's going to be a green sneaker, it's going to do this and that, or like the story of Lilith? How much did you have decided already versus, otherwise?
Nothing was really decided. I would say that on the footwear side, there were three things I knew I just wanted to index on because again, voice of the customer is something that's so important. We study that in business, right? Like if customers are complaining about something, you should go out and talk to them. And I did talk to a lot of women in 2019 about like, what were their pain points when it comes to shopping for footwear. And the three things that came up were size run, right? Like sometimes I wear, if I have wide feet or I have smaller feet, or hey, I actually wear like really large sizing and I typically have to shop in the men's section, but I don't like the men's styles, right? Like the colors. The second issue was the use of cheaper materials, which is just an industry issue as a whole. They typically think that women aren't paying attention to the upper materials that are being utilized in the construction of the shoe. So a lot of synthetics get used, or it's a takedown material compared to what they use with the men. Like men might get like a beautiful supple suede, but the women won't. And I noticed that as a consumer growing up, because I would be like, because I would get pushed to shop in the men's or into the into women's, right? Like, because when I was looking for shoes, and I would intentionally walk over to the men's section and compare the two versions and notice how different it was. And I think it was a bigger issue back then when I was growing up. There's been definitely some strides made on that side today, but that's something I knew I wanted to index on. And the last thing was the outsole was super important, because the feedback I kept getting was like, I want the comfort of a running shoe, but like a shoe that I can wear all day. So performance tooling is usually, like, when I say tooling, it means outsole or midsole. It's typically something that they invest in on the men's shoe. But sometimes when it comes to women, they'll give us a stripped down version. Or if women are wearing the children's version of a shoe, children's shoes are meant to turn over, right? You're constantly growing out of your shoe sizes. And so you're not really going to put an expensive piece of tooling or something that's really good on performance, but that's what women were wearing for year after year because they were forced to shop that sizing. And so those were three things that I had spoken to my footwear team about, like, really, like, we need to make sure we have a full size run, use like leathers, like really good suedes, pebbled leather, nubuck. And three, like, invest in good performance tooling where the women are being supported on their feet, because you can run 1 hour out of the day, but like most of us are standing, simply just standing or walking 14 hours of it in a day. And you just need something super comfortable that you can transition from work to evening to dinner. And so I would say on the footwear side, those were my priorities. And then on the branding side, I would say, I was kind of like open to suggestions, because I've never activated the creative side of my brain, to be honest. And it's not something I thought too much about. Like, I'd never identified as a creative, but I did want to explore, or give women the freedom and femmes the freedom to explore, like, sexuality, gender, style on a spectrum. Like, you can totally wear your sneakers with the basketball shorts, but you can also wear it with a maxi dress. You can wear it with a sari. You can wear it, and explore that. And as a function, then have that show up in the creative and the editorial content that we push out. Because I wasn't seeing that done at all. Historically, you always saw it like on like shots of the product on a basketball court, or it was like soccer related, or, still very sport heavy. And, most of us don't do any of that on a given day. And so I was like, okay, we need to take this outside of sport. Like, right, there's a world beyond that, and sport's fine, but there's also a world where women show up, we contain multitudes. So that was really important, and kind of like telling the story through like the divine feminine, like, it's okay to be femme, and to explore that. So that was just kind of the main premise for the storytelling on the branding side.
Yeah. Oh, I think all of that is so beautiful and so important. And I love, my background was in marketing when I went to business school. So thinking of even like just how authentically you did like the market research, like the consumer studies, almost like just being a woman and like talking with women. It reminds me of, like, I don't know if you learned in business school, like the Febreze case study, right? Like Febreze is supposed to be like, it literally eliminates the odor, right? Like, it actually kills the smell, but it had no scent itself. And people were nose blind, right? So you'd have this chain smoker and you'd put Febreze in their house and they'd be like, nothing really changed, right? Like, I mean, it's like, no, like the whole thing changed, right? And they went into people's houses and they actually watched that people who were loyal customers use Febreze, and they used it as kind of like a check mark at the end. So they clean their whole room and they just like spray Febreze. And like, oh, we need to like make this like what it's about, right? And add a fun little scent and make it like, it's like your perfume after you shower. It's not your, a replacement of the shower. And so I think, you're similarly, you're walking with women and seeing like, they're wearing kids' shoes. Like, these shoes are not going to last for them, and they're going to wear them for 5 years because their feet aren't growing. Like, that's mind-blowing stuff.
Right. And they also, it's just like so detrimental to your overall like knee health, right? Like cushioning of your knee. And like, my mom was an ICU tech. She worked in the hospital for like 30 plus years, and she had to have double knee replacement surgery because just like the cushioning of the sneakers she wore, and she was working double shifts every day, just, wears on the cartilage. And so people, I mean, this is a massive issue, right? Like, just on overall effects on health and wellness, which I think women are just told to be like, just deal with it, and wear what's available, like, don't question it. So yeah, I think there's implications all the way through.
It's so wild. And then, to the branding side of what you were saying too, like, it's so, I mean, we're so adaptive, right? As humans, as women humans, especially, that we can just like fit ourselves into these molds that are given because there's not one that's there for us, right? To go into the kids stuff or to go wear the stuff that's advertised on a basketball court. So I really think that that was so wise for you to see that, like, we bring our own strength in our femininity and like, very unique, equal, but different contribution to
Right.
this world. And so to get to show up with sneakers that are for the 14 hours of walking or standing and doing the life in the work and at the home and like everywhere, is so important and so
Yeah.
interesting that we haven't done it yet. Like
And I
that's
think I always say this, but I say like women have always been asked to compromise, whether it's been like overtly said or just through the actions, right? Through the stuff that they put out. At the core of it, it's that we're as asked to compromise constantly, right? Like they don't design for us. There's a book called Invisible Women, you should check it out, but it's like how
ooh,
everything historically has been built without the women population involved, and that's kind of what's resulted in us being excluded from solutions and design aspects, and it's bizarre.
it's bizarre. So I noticed in your branding and the story for Lilith, shoes on, eyes open, right, is an important phrasing. Can you say more about what that means in this context?
Yeah, I think it's, I always wanted to show up as a brand that took a stance on things. And I think for us, it was, we were building in 2020, which was happening when George Floyd was murdered. And we have big push from the BLM movement happening. And all of everything, I felt like the world was just on fire. We had the pandemic, we had like the failure of the US government being able to provide for its citizens, like, and we never talk about that, I think, from a brand perspective. Like most brands will typically shy from it. They end up getting called out, and that's only when they activate. And I felt it was so important. Like, yeah, we're a sneaker brand, but there's so much more that we're trying to educate you on, right? Like whether it's about the divine feminine, it's about the fact that women's contributions typically get contributed to men, right? Or attributed to men. It's about the fact that, George Floyd and all these Black bodies were being murdered at the hands of the state. And so like that phrase was just super important to be like, yeah, we're sneakers, but it's also like, keep your eyes open about everything happening around you and question everything. And don't stay silent, right? Because silence is complicity. And so that was just like super important for us to communicate. And we use that all the time, anytime. And we like, you'll notice on our IG stories, we don't just talk about sneakers. It's politics. Like, is there a vaccine drive? Like the other day I was posting about monkeypox vaccine drives that are happening because like that rollout has been horrendous. So yeah, we talk about everything.
Yeah, I think that's so cool and so true to, what a brand is meant to be, especially in this day and age, right? It's like and in streetwear too, right? I feel like streetwear is all about showing what you've lived
Community
on your clothing and your community. And so to have shoes that are more than shoes and wonderful shoes, it seems really important and appropriate. And I always joke with my mom, there was a period where I did kind of like high heels, but I very much nixed those out of my life. I don't think I own a single pair. If I do, I haven't worn them in multiple years because I feel like I can't think when I'm uncomfortable, right? Like, so to me, shoes on, eyes open on another practical level. Like if I have the right shoes on, like my eyes can be open because
it's like the third eye's activated. Like everything
like
is
I'm ready to pay attention because if I'm uncomfortable, then I'm only going to get to think about myself and my discomfort. And I don't want to do that. So I love, yes, it works on so many levels. We talked a little bit about, what growing up in Queens meant for your appreciation of sneakers and the world that surrounds them, but we didn't talk as much about, being the daughter of Tamil refugees. How does that come up in your creativity and, where you are now? Because I think you mentioned it maybe on your website, but I don't know if we've spoken about it too much yet.
Yeah. So I think for me, it was, again, I think I was going down this like creative rabbit hole. I've never really tapped that side of me. And I felt it was such a great way to do the brand storytelling and drawing from some of these cultural touch points. Because I so identify with Queens. Like when someone asks me like where I'm from, like I enthusiastically always say Queens. Like that's just how I identify with. Like sometimes even I felt like my Tamil identity often took a backseat because of just how my parents raised us. There weren't a lot of Tamil families. There weren't a lot of cultural events where when we grow up, like now it's completely different in that sense. But I just felt like, you talk to anyone from Queens and like, we all identify as Queens. Like you can be Ecuadorian, you can be Peruvian, you can be Italian. And like, we all like have this like sense of Queens identity that's super strong and amazing. And I felt like when I was, learning about divine feminine and like symbols that represent divine feminine, we noticed like the serpent was coming up, right? Throughout time, religion, cultures, the serpent has always been a symbol of divine feminine. And so I actually come from like a tiny island. It's off the northern Jaffna Peninsula in Sri Lanka, where it's called Nainadiva, and it means Naina means naga or snake, and Thivu means island, so island of the serpents. So I was like everything was just like coming together from a research perspective, because I like love archaeology and I love history, and so we were like, okay. And Lilith is often represented, she's like the first wife of Adam, often represented as a snake, right? That's what the snake in the Garden of Eden is. It's Lilith being represented there. And she's the first feminist. She was banished from the garden because she didn't want to be submissive to Adam. And that story is often written out by male scholars, so we don't often hear it. But she is like truly the first feminist from a mythology standpoint. And so, the Tamil stuff came about just simply because of the symbolism we were seeing so much. And I often grew up with stories, my parents reminiscing about like, being by the ocean and, how symbolic that is as well. And I wanted to juxtapose like, Queens and New York being so gritty with like the lushness of the tropics, where they came from, right? Like how you really live off the land, and they're there now, and they literally, quite literally, we farm everything, we grow everything, we eat everything. And I wanted to showcase that beauty of Queens and the islands, right? Even though it's gritty in Queens. And so that was a very strong theme we wanted to highlight with a brand, that it's so rooted in Queens, but we pull from our immigrant history and our roots.
Yes, that is so, what Queens is, right? If anyone thinks of Queens and doesn't think of immigrant stories and coming together, then I don't know, they're thinking of the wrong Queens, right? They've got it confused. But I love that idea of, the softness and the islands and stuff, but also the grit and the beauty that is like the city life that is happening in Queens. And then, you mentioned that you like archaeology and history and stuff. And so I wonder, it was interesting to hear about the folklore of Lilith, because it wasn't something that I'd ever heard about before, but I am very well acquainted with the Bible and the story of Adam and Eve. And so I wonder if you have this part of it too. So Eve was kind of rebellious too, right? Like in the Bible, they might say, the man is the leader of this relationship, and Eve takes the apple and tries to kind of like lead Adam, but Adam's not a great leader in that relationship, because lets Eve kind of, usurp that, and then they're both led astray. Like, and I feel like that comes back to the sneaker culture too, of like men have just had this privilege of starting this sneaker culture and they haven't led it super well, right? And so maybe there's this moment right now where we're like breaking away and try to do our own thing. But if they, brought us in and we're good partners in that way, or if we could find a way to work with them, like there's going to be a future for the sneaker culture that's really cool. And right now it's kind of on these divergent paths, but it makes me excited. And I thought that was so cool how it all kind of comes together, even though we have a different kind of background with it.
No, 100%. And I think, I would say, there are some great, the footwear community has been super supportive, men and women, all genders, but, I think there's still a ways to go, like in terms of supporting each other. But I will say like the women are definitely making waves. We're seeing like such great strides just in the last year in terms of like product availability for women, size runs being improved upon, colorways. So it's moving in the right direction. But like you said, there's always going to be toxicity in the culture. Panels that are all male led, right? Like that's a huge issue. And then when they do a women's panel, it's like all women, right? Like they never think to mix it up.
Yeah.
Like a dedicated event, which is not really necessary. But so there's some work to be done, but I think it's happening.
Yes. And we'll pull up these shoes now to show, where it's happening really well and what people can learn from it. So the first slide, I put up like two different screens of your work. And the first one focuses really on the shoes themselves and the way that you're photographing them and showcasing the people who wear them. I'd love to hear kind of whatever comes up for you when you look at this product that you have had such an important role in making a reality.
I'll go with the first image because I really love our shoebox. I think for me, I always felt the shoebox was such a missed opportunity for storytelling. Traditionally, the shoebox comes in a brown cardboard box. Some people throw it away, some people keep it. But I felt like I always think about how do we communicate with our customers offline? Like if they're not on our website. And I think that internal lining, like, our shoebox for the next production run is going to be a little different, but it does a beautiful job of anchoring our story, which has symbols of serpents and the divine feminine. It has like the 7 train very centered there, to
Ah,
kind of
yes.
nod to queens, and just like that lushness, right? And it's just a beautiful box. I always think that women consumers too, like, treat things a little bit better, right? Like, I still have all my purse, like all my pocketbooks in like their boxes, right? And so we collect them. And so that's very much a thing. And just the vibrancy of the color, right? Like, the colorways were definitely inspired by the lushness of the tropics, but also just like, green bodega awnings, right? Like that you see through the boroughs. That was super key. And so that's really what inspired the colorways. And then from the photography standpoint, we really wanted to index on editorial, because I felt like that was such a miss, that it's always been so, not to knock on streetwear, but I just felt like I wanted our content to be able to live on a Hype Beast, a Sneaker Freaker, Vogue, Architectural Digest, because we pull from so many inspiration points. And so I wanted to make sure that it can live across all sort of industries and verticals. And so we do take a more editorial approach to the photography. And I think it's tied with some deep storytelling. Like, we shot the photo at the bottom, in the blue dress, the woman in the blue dress, we actually shot in a house that was designed by a woman architect who we talk a lot about on our Instagram. Her name was Minette De Silva. And she was just so advanced in her and the work that she did, and her contributions with tropical modernism, which is a style of architecture. She really pioneered it. But unfortunately, there's a man who, comes much later in his career, who gets credited for it, Jeffrey Bawa. And so we had the opportunity to shoot at her home. And it's, a lot of her homes are actually in disrepair and are kind of falling to the wayside. There's been no real effort to kind of preserve them, but we had the chance to photograph there, and it really weaves in the storytelling again. Like, I've been a woman in tech, women in architecture often get overlooked as well, and then women in footwear. So I just felt like it was a beautiful story to tell, and
Yeah.
kind of nod to her work and to her contributions to the style of architecture that so informs our brand ethos.
I love that. I think, even though on the surface level, that's a totally different story than like keeping your purses in the boxes they come in, like that intentionality, right? And the preciousness of the things we wear and the things we associate with, is so like valid and cool, to get to honor those different women, even through this shoe, and that photo shoot is really special. And I'm always going to remember the bodega awnings when I look at the shoes now, because that is such a sweet.
Even the house awnings, like, I lived in a house that has like the green and red or the blue awnings that you
Yeah,
have. So that's you see, and it's literally like that green.
it is amazing. Oh my gosh, I love that. And I remember you sharing some really special memories of like some of the older women that you've worked with in the photo shoots. Like, can you talk more about that?
So Avanti here is actually the mother of the woman who does all the styling and art direction for our shoots. And she, I think, kind of tagged along to one of the shoots, and they decided to place her as a model. And it's so interesting because I think oftentimes people think of like luxury footwear as something only like 20-something-year-olds or millennials are really focused on. But I actually had a woman reach out to me. She purchased a shoe. I didn't know who this woman was, but she reached out and said, "Hey, follow, came across your page, love your stuff. I'm a 74-year-old woman based in Ottawa, Canada. And, I've struggled for so long to find comfortable shoes." And so, and a lot of the other folks who wear my shoes are just like my friends' parents who will buy the shoes, and they're in their 60s, late 60s. And they love it. Like, our shoes are made with a high abrasion EVA. It's very lightweight and it feels like you're walking on clouds, is how everyone describes it, which is so important because I think the older age groups are typically overlooked by consumer brands. They're usually not at the heart of an editorial campaign. And there was actually a second message I received from a woman in New York who said, "Please don't forget about us." She said that to me, like, with respect to her age group. She's like, "Brands never build for us. They never design for us." So she's like, "Keep doing what you're doing. Please don't forget about us, because we're more than happy to pay and buy, but no one ever kind of targets us." So I thought that was really fascinating. Just given, how brands have operated historically. And it's true, right? Like, how often do you see folks in these other generations that are covered, like baby boomers, etc., right? You don't really.
No, and it's the same in, I worked in that media measurement world before switching to
Right.
social work, and the target demographic is like 18 to 20 to 54, maybe 20 to 25 to 54, right? And then you're just kind of gone, like whatever, even though you have so much disposable income, generally speaking, hopefully. And then in social work, I'm preparing for my licensure exam right now. And so I was reading, different developmental stages people have really thoughtfully researched, except when you turn 60, it's all about death and dying. It's like, you've got so much more hopefully before that, right? Like,
And I think life expectancy is not that bad as it used to be, right? I understand like
right.
back in the day when people were dying at 60s and 70s, but like people are lasting much longer. They're living, I think with COVID, they are getting more and more into exercise. They're living healthier lifestyles. And it's quite sad, to be honest. I think the only companies I ever see target this generation is pharmaceutical companies when they're trying to push a drug, right? Like that's the only time I ever see marketing directed at this cohort of folks. So it's unfortunate, but we tried to address that.
Yeah, and it turned out so stunning. Like, I can't imagine that woman didn't know she was going to be in a photo shoot that day. Like, she is
Yeah,
just gorgeous
setting.
in every way. And then I was reading a bit about the material, you call it like Vibram or Vibram.
Yep, this outsole. Yep.
So what is that about?
So that's the outsole that you see, the bottom piece, the sole of the shoe, the midsole, and they are actually really well known in the industry for performance wear. So hiking boots, militarized boots, actually men's wear, like men's footwear, they'll use a lot of that tooling. And it goes back to my point of men have enjoyed a level of performance that women simply haven't for decades. And I wanted to introduce women to that. So like when you see their logo is actually a very distinct yellow logo at the bottom of the shoe. And when I tell men about the brand and how I use it, they're like, oh yeah, I know it. I have a few shoes with it. When I talk to women, they've never heard the brand. They're like, I don't know, unless of course they're like, really hardcore like hikers, right? Because they'll actually see that in their shoes. But oftentimes women aren't familiar with the brand. So I was like, this is a great opportunity for us to educate them on the importance of the actual outsole, right? When you're standing on your feet for so long, and to have something that's so comfortable on your feet, because typically a lot of them are just made cheaply. And so that was just really important to index again on the performance side of the footwear.
That's amazing. I literally has been an education opportunity for me too. And I thought I knew quite a bit. Like, that is awesome. I also love the strap along the top. Like, was that something that was important to you going into this, or that came up in this like design process with other people? What is that about?
Yeah, so that came up in the design process with our footwear designer. Her name is Sarah Jaramillo, and she, we went through this long process, I would say, of kind of figuring out like what type of silhouette do we want? What's the story we want to tell with the footwear? Because I think I naively thought I can just bring on a design team and get to like what's called a tech pack. The tech pack is like what you send the factory in terms of the requirements, the materials that are going to be used, the color Pantones. And she really did a wonderful job of deep diving into like my childhood, like where did I grow up in Queens? What inspired me in Queens? What do I hold on to? Like, I love food culture in Queens. I love going to the restaurants. I love all the different religions represented in Queens and the iconography associated with it. And so we started just like, she would create all of these decks for me to look at silhouettes of the shoes, like do you want high tops, do you want low tops? And the strap was actually inspired by some photos I had shared with her from childhood where my siblings and I were wearing socks and sandals, which is such an immigrant parent thing to do to your kids, which is a trend now, right? Like a lot of us wear socks and sandals with our Birkenstocks, but it's just so funny because it's evolved, but we would actually get made fun of for doing that as the children of immigrants. And so she loved this like nod of like, we originally had two straps, was like the original design, but when we actually went to production, we realized, or it's like to sampling, it just didn't look right. Like it wasn't fitting correctly on the toe box. And so we stuck with one simply as a nod. And then the liner of the shoe was actually supposed to be more of a sock liner, as again, a nod to the sock and sandal look. But I just was worried that the sock would kind of like, fall to your ankles at some point, like after like it gets stretched out a little bit. So we went with more of kind of like a neoprene type insert there. But that was honestly like the inspiration for the silhouette was like you're wearing socks and sandals, but in a sneaker form.
Oh my gosh, I did not think I could love them more, but I do. I love that is so special. And I love that it became one strap. I think that's
Yeah.
so cool. It's kind of like more abstract, right? Or like even more nuanced, but it is amazing. And then so this is more of like maybe the lifestyle parts
Yeah.
of the brand too. Like, did you know going in that you were going to flesh this out beyond the sneaker itself, or how did you decide what elements to include in this extension of the brand?
So this was clothing was really a function of us having a lot of delays on the footwear because of COVID. And we launched a pre-order site in January of 21. And I from a consumer standpoint, when people pre-order and you don't know when you're going to get it, you want someone to be able to also purchase something that's tangible that they can represent your brand with. And so hoodies, t-shirts, hats, we kind of just were like, okay, you can buy the shoes, but you can also buy this and you can get that now. So that was like never a question. And people loved it. Like they, love the t-shirts and especially the hoodies. I think they're very heavyweight kind of streetwear style. And there's like 2 embroideries. It has like our main logo. And then at the pouch, it has a lot of like the illustrations that we love with the snake kind of going into a branch. So that was just really a function of us like trying to maintain a better pre-order system. But I think we always get requests for like more apparel, like different styles of apparel, like sweatsuits, bodysuits, swimwear. So I think possibly category expansion down the line, but I think we're hyper focused on footwear. But people obviously want to represent your brand beyond just the sneakers, right? They want a tote bag. They want lighters. They want candles. So it's slowly becoming a lifestyle brand, it seems.
Wow. Yeah. Just kind of like leaning in or listening to the consumers is so exciting to see what unfolds from there. And I love the colors here too. I love that like more neon-y moment with the hat, or like the lime kind of green
Yeah.
is very special.
Yeah, we actually did that one because you'll notice the world is out. So that's actually one like that's kind of dedicated more to queens. But originally we had like an accent color for our brand colors that had like a neon. So we just kind of tested it out and everyone loves it. So
So fun. So we'll have to stay tuned to see what kind of colors pop up next and things. And it was so great to kind of deep dive into those products with you. And as we think more toward, the future and abstract back to that kind of level of the conversation, I know maybe VC funding is something that's kind of top of mind for you lately. What has that experience been like, and what are you seeing about women in that space, like you've done in every kind of other space that you've entered?
So VC it stands for venture capital. And so I've been bootstrapped to date. And so people typically when they launch a brand, if you want it to be venture backable, like, you have to grow it at a great scale, become really big. They'll usually take on that sort of external financing. Other people might do a small business loan. So it's something I've explored. I think kind of accelerated by the fact that we had such a great reception by folks like purchasing the shoes even abroad. Like we've had customers in Indonesia, in Berlin. And so I feel like we've been getting a lot of requests for people to carry our shoes abroad as well, right? Even domestically. And so venture capital would give us the opportunity to move a little quicker and reach those milestones and hit them and move a little quick. So something I'm exploring. I mean, it's very hard. Only 1.7% of women get VC funding. It's a quite terrible situation. And it's actually it's gotten worse with COVID in terms of the numbers of women getting funded, especially Black and brown women. And so yeah, it's a longer situation. And obviously it's a recession at the moment, or kind of pseudo recession, bear market. So it's not the greatest of timing, but it's something that I'm looking into. So we shall see. But regardless of external funding, we'll still move ahead with some colorways. We're hoping to drop 2 by holiday. And we'll have like pre-orders available for that. So things are still moving along despite what else is going on in the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, well, I don't know, if I was a entrepreneur, I'd be most excited about the chance to just kind of like, set the vision, like move forward without asking permission, like skip the steps in the corporation. I imagine I would be personally like a bit frustrated or discouraged by having to go to ask people for stuff. Like that seems like a really hard, vulnerable, humbling thing that you're in the process of.
And I'm with you. Like, I love the fact that I had that freedom the last 2 years to build to my vision. Like I was so hyper focused. I'm someone who's like just self-motivated on my own. Like I don't need a lot to build. And I was worked super lean to get this executed. And I think we did a good job of it being self-funded, right? Like didn't take any external capital at all. Like people don't believe me, but it's true. And so I think yeah, the situation changes as soon as you take like external capital from folks, like especially VC money. So we'll see where it goes. But it should be exciting though, because I definitely want to get the product into people's hands, like abroad. Like people obviously want it. So there's a huge opportunity there.
Yeah, I think you have had so much intention in your story with how the brand shows up, how you show up, that like that will continue to be the case with the VC stuff, and you'll be able to make it your own, and that'll
Yeah.
be awesome for all of us to get to witness and reap benefits from. But at the same time, as like it kind of segues to the next thing I'd love to know from you is, why does creating a sneaker that's designed for women and their lifestyles matter? What keeps inspiring and motivating you to figure it out, to try to get it in more people's hands and all of that?
Because I think it hasn't happened. It literally has not. We've been wearing shoes designed by men for these brands have existed 40, 50 years now, that they're literally celebrating these anniversaries this year. And I don't think they've realized, and two, the data tells us women outspend men in sneaker sales year over year, right? So why wouldn't we want to serve them? Three, women own 80% of online transactions. I'll say that again. Women own 80% of online transactions. So your website should be merchandised for women. And we're seeing that actually, like traffic is leaving these male dominated looking sites to sites like Lululemon, Carbon 38, Sweaty Betty, right? These are sites dedicated to women's lifestyle, women's, things that they do, fitness focused moms or women on the go, right? Like that is the storytelling and narrative that we need to be pushing. And it's not happening from these big brands. And we can't expect them to. Like at the end of the day, like you still have the same people running the show, which is why we're having these breakthrough moments of new brands emerging hyper focused on women and femme consumers, because you can't, for me at least, my personality has never been to lean and expect someone else to execute. I'm just going to do it on my own. And I think that is the future. So for me, that's kind of the motivation. And two, I think like I get text DMs from every corner of the world that tell me like, holy shit, I've never seen content like this in an editorial form or sneakers like this. When are you coming to my country? Can you please, like, I want to buy your shoes. Like that to me alone is motivating, that I know that this needs to keep going at a bigger scale. It's going to take us time because right now I am still self-funded, but we'll get there at some point. But I think like that alone, just like hearing from women customers, is motivation enough for me.
Yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful. Is there any, are there any lessons that you've learned along the way that have been deeply meaningful for you, or wisdom that you would share if people are maybe in their own walks of life noticing gaps or opportunities to serve people better, or they're in the sneaker world and they want to keep helping it to move in this direction that celebrates every walk of life that's in a sneaker? What would you say to those folks?
I think to the first part of your question, I would say like, you don't need to quit your full-time job. Like I know I did, because obviously it would have been a conflict of interest for me to stay on as I pursued this. But if you have a side interest or side hustle, you can totally do that while you're working full-time, and people will definitely find ways to support you. So I knew that I had to get out for a couple of reasons. There was a conflict of interest, and then the footwear team also had a conflict if I stayed at a footwear company. So I had to break away, but that doesn't mean you have to. And you can totally side hustle and work at your own pace and save up money and funds. There are other means. You don't need to take venture capital if that's not your jam. For a lot of people, like I also was kind of against it at some point. There are other ways to do it. You can do crowdfunding, which is a way to get capital, non-dilutive capital as well. There's small business loans that you can do. And then, people do pre-order models, right? I think pre-order models emerged out of COVID when the supply chain was broken, where you can place the order now, grab that capital, build what you want to build, and then push it out to market and send it to the customers. So there's ways around it where you can still move at your speed without having to like leave your day job and leave that security. Because I get it. Like I personally came from a place where I wanted that financial security. I knew that I had the money in the bank to do this, but for so long I didn't. And so I totally understand that hesitation there. I think to your second point of people in the sneaker community, I personally found the sneaker community to be so supportive. I've been so lucky that men and women, all genders, have been incredibly supportive and lent a hand in making connections for me and putting me in touch with people and getting me on podcasts to talk about what I'm building, which then gets me in front of like a larger audience. So I'm grateful. So I would say like lean on your community. Like we're always here to help. I always take calls with people who are building and founders. So
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to kind of impart what you've experienced along the way that's been helpful. As we are coming to like a sort of a close here, and it's been so sweet, what do you want people to leave knowing about you and your work, and what are you really looking forward to right now? And that could be your version of the frozen pizza on a Friday night, or it could be something about sneakers or anything.
I think for me, it's like, I really built this brand for folks to feel seen. And I think I'm seeing that happen. And so I hope that you feel seen when you engage with our brand. There's lots to come, so keep an eye out. You can follow us on Lilith.NYC or check out our site. It's Lilith.NYC as well. But apart from that, yeah, like if you have any feedback, I'm always open, hit us up. DMs are open. But yeah, I would say like, I just hope people feel seen by our brand. Like that is my ultimate goal when people ask me about like my mission. So
I love that. Maybe the extension of the slogan is like shoes on, eyes on open, DMs open too. Right?
Yeah, I'm always answering. I'm always answering people's questions. So
so nice. You were so I'm so thankful that you answered me and we were able to connect as fellow scanners separated just by
enough.
Exactly. Years. I wonder, our last names are in a similar part of the alphabet. Like maybe we had the same locker or something, right? Like you never know.
Yeah, it's true because all of the S's were clustered together. So that's a possibility. I don't remember my locker number though.
I don't either, but maybe they keep that record somewhere. I don't know. Maybe there's a way that we can figure out just how closely we've been intertwined without even knowing it. But it's been such a joy to get to know you and your story and how you're kind of, shaping the world from Elmhurst. It's so great to see, and I'm really excited to kind of share it with a different pocket of the world. So thank you again, Sarah.
No, and thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Yeah.